So for me, I think that the theme of this evening is thanks. I mean, most of us were just celebrating Thanksgiving with our families and friends. And so I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunity to have an event here like this. Incredibly thankful to be in a place like New York City where you can't really swing a dead cat around without hitting lots of really talented people who we've been able to draw on for this event. So I want to thank our musical guests who are all remarkable rising stars in their fields, and our main guest will introduce them. An incredibly international group, right? We have natives of Beijing and Treviso and Prague performing for you tonight. And I'm especially glad, of course, to be welcoming our featured star, MICHAEL BECKERMAN, who you have a lot of details on in the program notes. He is, of course, chair of the Department of Music at NYU and a collegiate professor and the bearer of the Carol and Milton Petrie Chair, and just this year was awarded the Gratias Agit Award by the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is, again, the Czech government's way of saying thank you for doing so much. Yeah. Thank you for doing so much. The title of the award is for spreading the good name of the Czech Republic abroad. And certainly a few people more deserving of this than Mike Beckerman, who I think quite simply has done more than anyone, probably ever, to make Czech music understandable and appreciated by readers of English. And it's not just in his tremendous published work, but in his incredible generosity in doing events like this, reaching out to the public and sharing with us his knowledge and his appreciation of this music. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mike Beckerman.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks to Chris for such a lovely introduction. Whatever I've done for Czech music, it's done double for me, and it's been such a treat and an honor to have been involved with it. I want to thank Susanna Halsey also for setting this up. So thank you, Susanna. And I guess I also want to wish whoever celebrates it a happy second night of Hanukkah. I won't be lighting candles for health reasons during the talk, but nonetheless, I wish everyone a lovely holiday. So it's really a delight to be here to speak to this audience and to speak about the great Jaroslav Ježek. As you have already heard, I will be joined tonight by some wonderful musicians. Martina Barta and Francesco Pollon will perform some of Ježek's songs, and SIYUMENG WANG will play parts of Ježek's really wonderful, revelatory, his great Piano Sonata. Now, I don't quite know how I got to be here tonight. More than 10 years ago, I published an article with the title of The Dark Blue Exile of Jaroslav Ježek. I've always admired him, and I found it fascinating that he had two rather separate artistic lives, the one as a kind of avant-garde art composer, and the other as one of the leading composers of popular music. Like Gershwin, only more so, with a real split between writing avant-garde, difficult, dissonant music on the one hand, and writing some of the greatest hits the country had. So, you know, if anything whets your appetite, you can go back to this article. And I'd like to say that this talk has already had a profound effect, which is there were many videos that were on that. It was an online article. And I'm pretty sure that as a result of the advertising this talk, they've all been removed by YouTube. So it's already had a very positive effect. At any rate, I'll try to reinscribe them so you can listen to some of these things over again. So I haven't really done that much work on Ježek since, although in the months leading up to this, I've thought a lot about these pieces. But I did write one small article in one of my favorite publications, the Czech Music Quarterly, that featured this picture. You might recognize Igor Stravinsky, looking very much the confident, cosmopolitan modernist, and behind him, looking cross-eyed, is Jaroslav Ježek. If you didn't know anything about Ježek, you'd probably think he was mesmerized by Stravinsky's cigarette, but obviously we know that Ježek was almost blind, so this is a kind of disability issue. But if you were to look for something that seems to illustrate the great man comes to the provinces, you could hardly find something better. But one of the things I tried to do in this article is to play around, because there are other versions of this photograph. There's that one with Haba sitting there, and then there's this one with Křička, and there's this one with all of them. And I guess the point I was trying to make was, well, the past is hard to get a hold of. Even with a photograph, you have 4 different versions of it. One's blue, one's not. One shows this character, one shows this one, and the conclusions you might draw from any one are quite different. And then when you try to imagine what would have happened the moment they got up and moved in different directions, and you realize you know nothing about that, you hopefully develop a little bit of modesty and humility in dealing with the past and how one does it. So part of this talk will be a recap of some of the things I wrote about more than a decade ago. And another part will ask some questions about how music comes to mean something to us. And I'll once again try to address the mystery that still surrounds Ježek's Piano Sonata, which is, I think, rather strange. For those who like cosmic compositional coincidences, Ježek was born on the same day as Dmitri Shostakovich in 1906. He was born with poor eyesight, and a series of operations left him nearly blind for his adult life. In addition, he suffered from ear infections that impaired his hearing. He attended a special school for the blind where he learned to play piano and cello, clarinet, and guitar. He tried to get into Charles University to study musicology, which is odd, and he wasn't admitted. He didn't have the requisite background. He wanted to study piano, but the piano faculty felt that because of his poor vision, he shouldn't be allowed to study piano, so they let him study composition. And he studied there with Karel Boleslav Jirak, Alois Haba, and also the great Josef Suk. We have a bad habit, those of us who study music, of often separating the composer from the larger work. Thus, we think that Mozart wrote Don Giovanni and Stravinsky composed The Rite of Spring, even though Da Ponte and Diaghilev deserve ample credit for those creations. And 2, we might say there would be no Ježek as we know him today if he hadn't become associated with the 2 intellectual clowns, Vaskovec and Verich. In fact, it was the mutual interdependence of this trio that marked and created the fantastic success of the Osvobozene Divadlo, the liberated theater. There was no collective in Czechoslovakia that could create the excitement, joy, and wit of this troupe during the 1930s. So I'd like to show you one example of their work, just a little clip. And this is singing their song David and Goliath, which is, of course, a metaphor for the small countries of the world trying to stand up to the larger ones. I've put the text, a free translation, on the left. So.
Podívejte se na ně, musíte naříkat. Obrť trofy ti mužíka mytlí, domnívají se, že vyhraje. Klidně seďme na židli, čtěme Bibli, tam to všechno je, Samuelova kniha nám povídá, jak na Žida přišla veliká bída, jak ti bídní filištíni válku nebyli, až potkali Davida. David šel do války, volky nevolky, velké dálky nesl bratům homolky, pochodu se cvičil vodu, dal si prostej čapří hodu, 3 šutry do tobolky. Hej, hej, kam se valej, ty co malej, nikoho nevidí. Takhle Goliáš ho provokuje, David slušně salutuje, když mu ale obr plivnul do očí. David se otočí, prakem zatočí, když začínáš, no tak tu máš, byl si velký, a měl kuráž, a jaký byl Goliath.
It's a wonderful little clip, but you could even see the kind of completely charmed and disarmed audience just sort of really sucking it up and just getting so much pleasure out of it. So it's very hard to separate the success of liberated theater and Ježek's music for it. And I think, again, it's a wonderful example of a great collective that you could describe and ascribe the creative genius to a team rather than a single individual. Ježek's almost countless songs are often local in attitude and certainly bear the kinds of rhythms created by Czech word accents. But a lot of the rhythms and certainly the basic models come from musicians in the United States. And these songs were inspired by the Tin Pan Alley recordings that Ježek listened to, and especially the works of Gershwin, which had completely blown Ježek away. So again, we're extremely lucky that we're going to have several performers who will bring this composer to life in a way impossible through mere words. Martina Barta, who has just gotten off a plane, is a noted and important singer with a wide repertoire, and she will sing several times during this presentation, accompanied again by the pianist Francesco Pollon. She'll begin by performing 2 songs, Klobok Křoví and Nebe na zemi, and she'll say a bit about them. Please give a warm welcome to Martina and Francesco.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for such a nice invitation. And I just wanted to say a couple of words about the music of Jaroslav Ježek, because this music, I played it a lot with my family and these songs, and also with my sister, who is also a wonderful jazz piano player. So when I was asked to perform as a part of this event, I somehow it brought a lot of memories from my childhood, and I spent quite a lot of time listening recordings of Jaroslav Ježek. And so now we will play 2 songs. The first one is called Klobouk ve křoví, which is about a hat which is somewhere in desert, like one lonely black hat, and someone is asking himself, who was the person who was wearing this hat? Who was the person who was walking through the desert, and why was he alone in the desert? So, Klobouk ve křoví. Vítr vane pouští, po písku žene klobouk, zahnal ho do houští. Starý a černý klobouk, kde pak je ta hlava?
klobouk nosila, byla černá či plavá. Komu asi patřila? Kdo to v poušti zmizel? Odkud šel a kam? Jaký to měl svízel, že byl v poušti sám? Jen zaváté stopy, starý klobouk ve křoví. Nikdo nic nepochopí, nikdo se nic nedoví. Starý klobouk ve křoví, nikdo nic nepochopí, nikdo se nic nedoví.
Francesco Pollon. Thank you very much. Děkujeme moc. Thank you very much. And the next song is called, it's a very funny song. It's called Heaven on Earth. Nebe na zemi. And this song was made very popular like maybe 10 years ago, because there was a very famous Czech movie called Pelíšky, and this song was also played and sang by a Czech actor Bolek Polívka. So this song got quite popular also like in the last few years. And the lyrics in this song are about like the person who is singing that song is saying, I don't need billions of stars in universum. I don't need nirvana or all that stuff. I'm happy living on earth, and like for me it's heaven on earth. So this is the next song, Nebe na zemi.
Na nebe nevěřím, když někdo svět pomlouvá, vždycky láteřím. nestojím o nekonečno s hvězdami všemi. Stačí mi pár krásných let někde na zemi. A když já vám povídám, že je nebe na zemi, pravdu mám, věřte mi. Za život dám, i když nerad umírám, nejsem sám. Věřte mi, pro toho, kdo chce žít, je na světě plno krás a z těch krás nebe mít. Záleží jenom na vás, jen na vás, věřte mi. Záleží, kdy přijde čas, kdy pro vás začne nebe na zemi. Pro toho, kdo chce žít, je na světě plno krás a z těch krás nebe mít. Záleží jenom na vás, jen na vás, věřte mi. Záleží, kdy přijde čas, kdy pro vás začne nebe na zemi. O, kdy pro nás začne nebe na zemi. Kdy pro nás začne nebe na zemi.
Francesco Pollon, thank you very much.
Thanks for that absolutely fabulous performance. You know, I was talking to my kids the other night about, you know, that if I give a talk, I never like to give the same talk twice. I would, you know, I consider like a fraud if I were to give the same talk twice. And we were talking about how like a comedian would spend years sort of honing the same material to make it really sharp. And so I just want to say this is the first time we've done this. I've never heard them play until now. I was really blown away by the wonderful interpretations of these pieces. I also want to say for those of you who don't understand the language, okay, so you know the whole thing with the masks where, well, if you see somebody with a mask, often when they take it off, you're shocked because they didn't look like you thought they would. And that's because you kind of made up a story about what their face looked like because you couldn't see it, and then often it's different. So I think when we hear pieces in a different language, we don't feel like, oh my God, if only I knew what they were saying, I could enjoy it. We kind of make up a story about what we think it probably is. It's a popular song, so what could it be? And I think we have no problem listening. If I were speaking a foreign language and you couldn't understand, you'd get awfully frustrated. But listening to a performance like this in a foreign language, I think is, we somehow make up a story about what it's really about. So this irreverence, though, of the liberated theater was comic, but it was also political. So while at the same time they were churning out masterpiece after masterpiece, like George and Ira, you know, like the Gershwins, masterpiece after, like Irving Berlin, masterpiece after masterpiece, they were also getting in hotter and hotter water as the political situation changed in Czechoslovakia. And by 1939, early 1939, they realized that it was time to get out of Dodge, as we say. And in January, barely 3 months before the Nazi invasion in March of '39, they got on a ship. And here's a caricature that Hofmeister made of them. Before we put them on the ship, though, I wanted to give you just one chance to hear a snippet of what Ježek's big band sounded like. The story goes that Benny Goodman was walking past a recording studio in New York, and he heard a record. And he said, "Hey, that's great. It's Jimmy Lunsford, isn't it? One of the great band leaders." And somebody said, no, it's a Czech. It's this Ježek." And Benny Goodman said, no, it's Lunsford. He said, "No, it's Ježek." And Goodman said, well, I can't repeat it in polite company. He said, "Don't with me." He couldn't believe that there was a band of that quality outside of the United States. So it's rather an extraordinary sound, right? Here, whence they arrived in New York, this is shortly after their arrival. There they are around the corner from here, right, 420 71st Street in New York, with a little cabaret trying to recapture the spirit. They found it very difficult to do this. They tried to make it in New York. They tried to make it in places like Cleveland, which Ježek absolutely hated. And they had a really hard time. Now, eventually, Vaskovec made it as an actor, but that took many, many years. And for all of these emigres, many of whom had been celebrities and superstars in their own country, it was really a reckoning. And for Ježek, who was nearly blind, quite sickly, didn't speak English, and had no money, it was quite a difficult time. Here's a little snapshot of the emigre community in happier times. That's Ježek on the right, Vaskovec and Verich. And on the left, well, we had Happy Hanukkah, that's HH, and this is Hugo Haas, HH, a wonderful actor, director who some years later would go to Hollywood and make it as a kind of character actor and make enough money to start his own B-movie studio. And I hope sometime to come and speak to you about his remarkable career. But this is a wonderful snapshot of those people. And he, of course, is the brother of the composer Pavel Haas, who was a student of Janacek's, who died in Auschwitz and composed several wonderful works in Terezin. This is one of the things that Ježek did. Jerry Yazek conducted the Czechoslovak men's chorus. I won't say that one of the reasons I gave this talk was the hope that somebody in the audience would know something about the Czechoslovak men's chorus, because it's very difficult to find out anything about it. But from newspaper articles, it seems as if it was a terrifically successful, a wonderful ensemble, and Ježek was quite gifted as a choral director. So I think for any sleuths around who want to go into old churches or other places, we can find some information about this wonderful choir that Ježek conducted when he was here in the country. Okay, so it's also quite interesting that Ježek and Voskovec and Verich were notably involved in the war effort, making many recordings of both cabaret numbers but also anti-Nazi songs of various kinds. So here's one. Ježek created this send-up, the V song. You might recognize it. So it's a little V for Victory send-up on Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You can see it on the recording, V for Victory. And also, they made up another H song, Less Happy, was a satirical song they made out about Hacha, who they referred to, of course, as a quisling for having betrayed the country, and referred to as HH, as Hitler's partner. And the sound quality of this is bad, but it's a recording, a song written by Ježek, performed by Voskovec and Verich, on a radio program, and this is in need of some remastering, but you'll hear it first.
Hank, will you play the introduction, please?
Hey, Mr. Hack, I know you try. You'll never have a moment's rest. From your headache, you'll be flying at breast-freaking counters dying. And as a corpse, you'll look your best. Hey, Mr. Hack, we are returning. You haven't heard from students yet. Though our school books you are burning, hey, in the underground we are learning how to make the German vermin sweat. You close the schools to education. Students will see that you repay. Met students in anticipation wait for fresh corpses for their trade. Hey, our machine guns all have waited. Death to the traitors we decree. With the rest exterminated, fooled and college liberated, we'll study in our land and free.
So this is the kind of songs that they were singing on Radio Free Europe and recording. You can find tape after tape of these that nobody's really looked at. It's quite fascinating material. Here is, this is the two of them, Voskovec and Verich, and the microphone. And here they are in an interview talking a little bit about Ježek.
The song was about the Czechoslovakian quisling by the name of Hacha.
And the line goes, Hacha je Hitlerův brácha, which means something like Hacha is Hitler's tail.
I see. Well, who wrote the song for you?
We do our own lyrics.
Oh, you do?
Jaroslav Ježek was our composer for 10 years. He did all the music in our theater, for our songs and the music for our plays. He died over here.
He was a rare guy. He could write the long hair modern music, you know, very modern. Mm-hmm. And he had the gift of popular music, too. He was a great expert on American jazz.
Did he write the song about Ha-Ha with you, too? Yes. Well, before...
So that's them talking about this composer. In their words, right, long-haired music, right? So, long-hair music was important to Ježek, and it was, in some ways, even more important to him in the United States because he said, well, perhaps as a throwaway line, but I think he believed it. He said, you know, after all, there's enough jazz in the United States. You know, they don't need me to come up with jazz. Benny Goodman's playing downtown. And so he wanted to make a contribution by writing art music, classical music. And to this end, he worked seriously throughout 1941, composing a piano sonata. Before we actually hear two movements of this piece, Ježek's really his last completed piece, we should rehearse the drama around its non-performance. The cast of characters in this small drama is rather large. It includes, in addition to Ježek, of course, the eminent Czech-German musicologist Paul Nettel, his wife Gertrude, and their son, the brilliant ethnomusicologist Bruno Nettel, who just passed away a year or two ago. It includes the composer Victor Ullmann, a student of Schoenberg's, and a notorious anthroposophist, the great pianist Rudolf Virkushny, the critic Olin Downs, the composer Bohuslav Martinu, and some others, and of course writers such as Václav Holzknecht, František Zinger, Jaroslav Ježek, and myself. We've all weighed in on this matter. Briefly, the story goes like this. Again, wishing to make an imprint on the American scene as a composer of modernist music, Ježek worked on his piano sonata really starting in 1940 through March of 1941. After playing it for Rudolf Virkushny, who, according to Ježek, liked the piece, Ježek decided to enter it in a competition of the International Society for Contemporary Music, a very prestigious group featuring new music, the best composers. After about two or so weeks after the piece was finished, this appeared in the newspaper. You can see it. The jury of the International Society for Contemporary Music has selected chamber works by 19 composers for performance here at its festival, which will be held for the first time in the United States next May. 5 of the composers, Edward Cohn, Aaron Copland, Russell G. Harris, Emil Kohler, and Paul Nordhoff, are Americans. This country will have the largest representation. Other composers in their countries are Paul Cardosa and Matthias Seber from Hungary, Salvador Contreras and the late Sylvester Revueltas from Mexico, Fiedelberg and Solowski from Poland, Juan Carlos Paz, Argentina, Jaroslav Ježek, didn't quite get the name right, Czechoslovakia, and then a whole series of other composers as well, including people like Paul Dessau and the very famous pianist Artur Schnabel and Anton Webern and Stefan Volpe. So this is heady company for Ježek to be in some of the greatest modernist composers. But then something strange happened. Something we don't understand to this very day. On the 15th of May, Ježek wrote the following to Vaskovec. Remember I told you earlier that I read in the Times that the International Music Festival taking place in New York would play one of my pieces? Well, you won't be able to look forward to this anymore because my piece won't be played. I don't know the exact reasons, but I'm looking into it as much as I can. Everyone's blaming someone else and nobody wants to own up to it. It's pretty obvious that up till now I haven't been very lucky. But who cares? I'll start over again and we'll see later. In the meantime, I'll keep composing and hope that I can write something while I'm still on this earth. He wasn't to be on this earth for much longer, and it's wonderful that he said he would keep composing, but he was devastated by this. So since no one actually knows what happened, as you know, in our world of conspiracy theories, if you don't know what happened, that's simply an invitation to invent something. And that's what happened. František Zinger, author of a book about Ježek called Šťastný Blues, Happy Blues, suggested that it was a work by Martinu that must have been substituted. A Martinu scholar, a wonderful Martinu scholar, Jaroslav Ježek, who among other things taught piano to Donald Trump's first wife. That's another story. Jaroslav took very heavy umbrage at this. He's a Martinu scholar and said that's outrageous. Václav Holzknecht, Ježek's friend and biographer, wrote this. Ježek started to sweat all the time and feel tired. His kidneys had already stopped working. And then something strange happened. The head of the jury was visited by a German musicologist, an immigrant from Bohemia, and it was decided in place of Ježek's sonata, a piece composed by one of his German protégés would be played. It was put about that Ježek's sonata had been lost. And in the end, Ježek was glad when the manuscript of the lost sonata was returned to him without apology. The German musicologists, note that musicologists are always the villain of the piece, was none other than Paul Nettel. And as part of my own work on the matter, I spoke to Paul's son, again, the eminent ethnomusicologist, Bruno Nettel. He had no knowledge of anything going on behind the scenes, but he did recall that it was his mother who played the piece which replaced Ježek's on the program. This was a sonata by Viktor Ullmann. In further discussions with Jaroslav Ježek, Bruno Nettel said he didn't think his father would have interfered with the jury selection in order to displace Ježek, but of course it was, Bruno noted, that it was an opportunity for his mother, Gertrude, to play a prestigious concert. I speculated that perhaps someone thought it might help Viktor Ullmann get out of Prague, where he was trapped, if he got a great review in a New York concert. Bruno didn't think that his father had any pull with the jury, especially since the head of the jury, composer Roger Sessions, apparently made a point of not inviting Paul Nettel to lecture at Princeton, little academic fights, and the jury actually consisted of the following: Stanley Chappell, a music professor at the University of Washington, the famous Austrian of Czech origin, Ernst Krenek, whose father was Czech, another professor, Joachim Kulmel, the wonderful composer Karel Rathaus, and then Roger Sessions. So this was a formidable jury, a wonderful jury, and they selected Ježek, and we don't know at all what happened. The irony is that the critic, Olin Downs, who reviewed it, wrote such a horrible review of it. Apparently, someone decided that since it was contemporary music, they had to shut the windows so no outside sound would get in. So the room was boiling hot, and Olin Downs, who was acerbic even under normal meteorological conditions, didn't even stay for the second half. So it's quite possible that, either Ježek would have gotten not reviewed at all, or like Ullmann's sonata, would simply have gotten panned by this grumpy critic. So again, while I still think the likeliest intervention was on behalf of Gertrude Nettel so she could play Ullmann's sonata, it's very far from certain, and we don't even know what mechanisms there might have been to change the program. So I invite you all to try to solve this mystery. But the idea that the sonata had been lost is ridiculous, since it obviously made it to the contest where it prevailed. So again, there was some shenanigans. The sonata itself is a wonderful, strong piece. Ježek as a modernist, reveling in tonal-based dissonance. We're going to look at two movements, the inner ones, both because I think they were representative of Ježek's slightly different art music orientations, and secondly because I'm giving the talk and I'm a great believer in middles. I believe that all the best stuff's always in the middle, and that, in so much music, the real stuff that the composer really wants to say isn't at the beginning or end, but it's in the core, in the center. So the second movement is a specific connection to the Czech national tradition. As dissonant as it is, it recalls some of Smetana's wonderful polkas. So let me ask the wonderful pianist, SIYUMENG, to come in and perform this. But I'm going to just ask her to play the very beginning of this polka. Just a couple of measures. Right, and then we have this over here, and then, sorry. So the spirit of Smetana polkas is captured in this wonderful tempo to polka movement from that. So please, and thank you so much for playing it. That's beautiful, SIYUMENG. It's a gorgeous performance of that piece. And you can probably tell, again, it's a polka, but with an edge, an edgeka. Now, again, the third movement of this piece, I think, is truly exceptional, a kind of proof, as I was suggesting earlier, that the soul of a movement is often in the interior. After all, it is interior, it's interiority. And this movement is by turns brutal, gentle, deeply haunting, and I think a synthesis of jazz and avant-garde classical. So I'm going to just ask her to play the two bits. This is the opening, which starts, again, in a very brutal way, even though it very quickly quiets down. But maybe just play the opening of it. Wonderful. That's a formidable opening. And then, you know, as I said, I love middles, but only thing I love more than middles is the middle of middles. And so there's this wonderful idea that comes in the middle of this, which again, I think it's really a synthesis of this classical and jazz in Ježek. It's kind of, you can imagine it played on a clarinet by Benny Goodman or something. And I'm just going to ask you to play the you know, from the beginning of this passage to just a couple of measures. And that's this wonderful idea that you'll hear take over the middle. And there's even a little jazz riff that you'll catch. So again, you know, we still don't know, after a lot of time thinking about it, how the feelings and life moods of composers find their way into compositions. And it's too easy in a way to take the portrayal of the ill and homesick Ježek and simply act as if the sonata is a soundtrack for that. It's kind of banal. But as they say in our business, it's not either or. And it wouldn't be a conspiracy theory to suggest, to the extent possible, he was actually telling us something about how he felt, in a way simultaneously subjective, but also quite objective. So thank you. Please play. Not 8 months after the moment this sonata was meant to been performed, Ježek was dead of kidney failure and pneumonia, died at the age of 35. And I suppose it's noteworthy that his funeral took place about 80 meters from where we are tonight at 347 East 72nd Street. I'm going to play a snippet of that funeral, the clip of which has rather miraculously survived. But first I'm going to talk a little bit about the song that accompanies this little film, and we'll hear a performance of it. Ježek wrote so many songs, it's probably silly to pick any one of them as his signature song, but this one has come to occupy a rather special position in his oeuvre. Let's let Vaskovec and Verich introduce it for us. I'm quoting them. Our theater toured around Czechoslovakia quite a bit, and our favorite destination, as mine was, is the city of Brno. It had a nice theater and a great audience. Students, young people, we loved performing there. Plus, we usually arrived in Brno in May, and that's a beautiful month. There are lots of trees in blossom, tulips, flowers, it's gorgeous. And one year, during a sultry hot May, Vaskovec and I walked past the empty theater and heard someone playing the piano. So we followed the music inside, and as we walked onto the stage, we found it in complete darkness, except for a single bright shaft of sunlight, which was coming from a window near the ceiling, illuminating the center of the stage. And there in the sunlight sat Ježek. He was improvising on the piano. He was playing a blues. He played a few bars, he stopped, and he went back to the beginning again and again. When he saw the two of us, he stood up and said, "Hey, it's too hot for this, guys. Let's go have a beer." But we felt really touched by his playing, and we said, wait, this is a great blues. Let's finish it. So he sat back down and started playing again, and as if from nowhere, these words popped into our heads. It isn't just that it's dark, but I can't see. I know that it's dark all around. Dark, I cannot see. I only see that I don't see a thing. If I could admit that I see, I would see more, but I can't see my face, I can't see my hands, and I can't see my knees. And we wrote the whole song then and there. Even though, as someone who lived for more than a year in Brno, I think in years probably closer to that date than this date, I'm delighted that this famous song was composed there. I'm always suspicious of the purity of origin myths. But however it came about, this song did take on special significance. As we've noted, Ježek was practically blind and could only see certain shapes and shadows. If he wished to see musical notation, he had to hold it up close, and many of his scores were in various kinds of Braille notation, and he had to hold things up to his one good eye. So Verich continues here, describing what the song became for all of them. Quote, "At that time, Vaskovec and I had no idea, in fact, that the words of the song expressed a kind of life blues of Jaroslav Ježek himself. He only told us many years later, when we were in exile in the United States, that he loved that song and those words most of all because they were about him, really. He couldn't see very well, and he saw blue color best. That's why the study in his flat was painted blue. That's why he always wore a blue tie, and that's why it's dark blue world." They were about him, really. That song, which Martina and Francesco will perform in its entirety, shares a kind of bluesy cadence which marks it symbolically. So here's the cadence. That cadence, dee da 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 da. You can hear it. He kind of maybe took a little of it from Rhapsody in Blue. And, he loved Gershwin. This is what he said in the 1920s. He said, "It was in this environment that I first heard Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and even today, I couldn't find the words for the dizzy intoxication with the record that it produced in me, what I had been unconsciously moving towards, and what I'd looked for in dance albums, and the poor piano arrangements of unknown piano composers stood before me unexpectedly in the utmost splendor, in complete perfection of form, in sensual seductiveness of content, in the exoticism of colors, sounds, and rhythms." So this is Ježek on Gershwin. And of course, if he borrowed from Gershwin, so did...
Well, they'll stone you when you're trying to be so good.
So here we go, and let's ask Martina and Francesco to perform this song, Dark Blue World.
Netoliko, že je tma, ale nevidím. Vím, že je tu všude tma, já ji nevidím. Vidím jenom to, že nevidím nic, když připustím, že měl bych vidět. Vidím víc. Svou hlavu trup, dvě ruce, nohy nevidím. Tak, kam se poděl můj doposud dokonalý zrak? Na všem leží neproniknutelně modrý mrak. Tmavo-modrý mrak. Sám nevím ani kudy jít mám a kam. A to, že na hlavě tmavo-modrý klobouk mám, to je právě klam. Nemám hlad, tak co mi naplat, že mi chutná. Co naplat, že ač nemám hlad, duše smutná. 5 neděl, 7 hodin, 3 měsíce a 6 let. Melancholicky jsem pozoroval svět. Tmavo-modrý svět. Neděl, 7 hodin, 3 měsíce a 6 let. Melancholicky jsem pozoroval svět. Tmavo-modrý svět. Tmavo-modrý
Thank you very much.
I think we need to find a kind of subterranean room in this hall and turn it into a jazz club and have Martina and Francesco as the stand-ins. It's really wonderful to hear that again, a gorgeous, gorgeous song. So again, as Vasquez implies, the real character of this song only seemed to crystallize during Ježek's exile, and after his death it became a kind of virtual manifestation of the composer himself. The notion of the dark blue world reached into every fold of Ježek's life and could encompass anything from a lighter, worldly bluesiness to a description of physical reality as Ježek saw it, to something representing the essence of loss and exile. And of course, blueness even extends to the famous Blue Room in Prague near the Old Town Square. I think it's my favorite museum in Prague, only open Tuesdays. For a couple of hours, it's right near the Old Town Square, and it's absolutely fascinating. Ježek's piano is there, scores and books and the furniture that he had commissioned. And this is just a little snippet of it. Unfortunately, the new MacBook Pros don't allow for the full color to come, but I'll do the best. This is a snippet of Ježek's Blue Room. And you can see the dark blue ceiling. And you'll see a little piano. Ježek's music library, signed scores by Stravinsky and others. So this is, again, the dark blue world of Ježek. And there are other ways in which the dark blue world has become emblematic of Ježek's life. Again, as I mentioned several years ago, an astonishing piece of footage appeared. The Czech jazz musician, Jiří Stevin, was apparently looking for a rumored audio tape of a conversation between Martinu and Ježek. And Ježek's widow sent him the tape, and when he got it, he realized it wasn't an audio tape at all. It turned out to be a film of Ježek's funeral that took place at the beginning of January in 1942, again, around the corner, in startling living color. So Stephen unofficially adopted it as a kind of short art film and added as a soundtrack his own arrangement of Dark Blue World, Tmava Modrý svět. Trigger warning, it's an open casket funeral. Of course, seeing it with the soundtrack of Dark Blue World makes the connection seem inevitable, but we know that the combination of music and moving images is tricky stuff. And you could also imagine a very different viewing of this funeral were it to be accompanied by, say, the third movement of the sonata, or even the polka. Ježek's life was amazing. Illness, joy, creativity, all kinds of obstacles that he overcame. While Dark Blue World and the sonata carry one side of his life and character, I'd like to end with another. The wonderful blues, Život je náhoda, life is not an accident, or life is not a game of chance, and Martina and Francesco will bring this presentation to a close. Please give them a warm welcome again.
Život je náhoda, jednou si dole, jednou nahoře. Život plyne jak voda a smrt je jako moře. Každý k moři dopluje, někdo dříve a někdo později. Kdo v životě miluje, ať neztrácí naději, až uvidí v životě zázraky, které jenom láska umí. Zlaté ryby vyletí nad mraky, pak porozumí, že je život jak voda, kterou láska ve víno promění. Láska, že je náhoda a bez ní štěstí není. Až uvidí v životě zázraky, které jenom láska umí. Zlaté ryby vyletí nad mraky a pak porozumí, že je život jak voda, kterou láska ve víno promění. Láska, že je náhoda a bez ní štěstí není. A bez ní, bez ní štěstí není.
Thank you, Francesco and Martina, and thank you, SIYUMENG, and thank you, Michael. Any questions from the audience for our maestro? Let me see if I can get a mic. Yeah.
Sure, please.
On the piano sonata that you mentioned that wasn't performed at the competition, when and where was it actually first performed, and what was the reception to it?
I don't know much about the reception. It was performed shortly after his death in this country, and it was performed, I think, in 1946 in Czechoslovakia by his friend and biographer Václav Holzknecht. But I think it was very well received. The piece hasn't quite entered the repertoire, but we're giving it a second chance, and I know that there are pianists who are anxious to play it, and when you hear the way SIYUMENG plays it, you realize this is a very powerful piece and quite individual. Thanks.
It was great. We all know that Jaroslav Ježek was influenced by American blues. Is there any record to indicate that he met with some of the bluesmen in the United States? I know that it was difficult, but...
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Did you meet any notable bluesmen in the United States?
Yeah, he met a couple of them. I know that he met Benny Goodman, and that was sort of a famous moment because as the first thing he said when they got off the ship was, Benny Goodman's playing tonight and I'm going to go hear him. So yeah, he met a couple of these people, but he wasn't really able to establish strong connections. And as I said, again, we don't know a huge amount about it, but he really made the decision that he wasn't going to try to make it as a jazz musician. He really wanted to, it's a little bit, I would be stretching it to say it was a little bit like Gilbert and Sullivan, where, Arthur Sullivan just really wanted to be a serious composer, but geez, it was just too good to be that successful with Gilbert. And of course they split up and went their separate ways, and Sullivan tried to make it as a classical musician, and he never really did achieve the same kind of cachet. And I think Ježek wanted to have a stab at being a kind of a Stravinsky. So I don't think he pursued these connections with jazz musicians as much as he would have 10 years earlier. There's a question in the front here. Yes.
I have two questions. He must have had a really remarkable family to give him the courage and confidence to aspire to enter Charles University and all of that. Do you know much about his family and their supportive?
Well, that's an interesting point. It would take a while to get to the bottom of that one because it seems that so many of composers have some weird combination of support and then parental indifference. I'm thinking of Beethoven or someone like Leopold Mozart, who was but supportive but also very difficult. Ježek's father, Ježek was born in 1906. Ježek's father was drafted, he was a tailor, and he was drafted into the army and came back with his health broken. He died himself at the age of 45. And they decided, after trying to go to a normal school, that they essentially sent Ježek away to, like Janacek in a weird, Janacek at the age of 10 was sent to the Augustinian monastery, and it was bye-bye, mom and dad, see you in a couple of years. And Janacek, how shall I put it? Well, this is probably not the moment to give you my full-on theories about the pathology of creativity and how much of creativity is a sense of emptiness which the artist is trying to fill. But, that would be reductive, but I think he was sent away for 6 or 7 years to a school for the blind where he had almost no contact with his family. And like Janacek in the monastery, he must have been both nurtured there, but also very much isolated. And I think these things probably played some role in the sort of complexity of his creativity.
And the second question is, what American jazz performers did he interact with or play?
Well, most of his contact with American jazz music was while he was in Czechoslovakia, listening to these big band records, particularly Gershwin. Gershwin didn't have a big band, but he played sometimes with them, especially Jimmy Lunsford, all these big bands, especially, again, Benny Goodman, who he revered. So he was very much, in terms of his big band style, you heard an example of that. You know, it was very much in the style of these big bands, like Goodman and Lunsford and those people. As a songwriter, I think he modeled himself on Gershwin, very much. A little bit of Irving Berlin, but there are songs of his where they don't sound anything like Gershwin, but if you look at the way they're structured and put together and the harmonies, it's very clear that, you know, I mean, you'd be surprised how many composers actually sit there with a score of another composer open on their writing desk, not to steal from it, but as a kind of inspiration or model. So I think that was Gershwin was someone, Gershwin, Goodwin, Lunsford, and those people were several of his great models.
Do you know if he ever went to the Cotton Club in Harlem?
Yeah, he did. He went all over New York. Again, it was tough because he was ill. And he traveled all over, and they traveled quite a bit. And they tried to make a career of putting on these shows, Češka Barbara, some of these Heavy Barbara about a gun, about a large artillery piece, which they put on in Cleveland. I do think, though, anyone who's really interested, there must be more materials. When I was in Cleveland, I went to the Czech Hall and tried to find any record of these productions, but they probably are somewhere.
The Blue Room that you showed on the screen, was that his residence? I mean, and so when, and also was he returned back to the Czech Republic?
Yeah, he was. He lived in, his parents lived in that house, and he had this room, right? And it's another example of well-intentioned bad medicine. Some doctor told him that it would be good for his eyes if the room was painted blue and dark blue. It turns out, as far as I know, talking to ophthalmologists and other doctors today, that's the worst thing you could have done. You know, it is, so that's part of the way that, I won't say comedy, but some irony seeps into other situations. But it's a very moving space. I mean, it's really, I'm not kidding. You know, it's one of my favorite places to go, sort of commune with Ježek, but because there are so few visitors, you get to play Ježek's piano. I mean, I was once in Independence, Missouri. They wouldn't let me touch Harry Truman's piano, but, you know, you can sit down and there are Ježek scores on the piano, original scores. You can sit down and they let you play them. And again, as I said, his collection of scores and books with his markings and notation, they're all right there. So yeah, buy your ticket. I mean, I think it's one of the great places to go. And he was returned, I think, I don't remember, right after the war to Czechoslovakia.
Wonder if the current performers who try to blend jazz and classical music perform his music.
You know, I don't know if they do. I don't know if they do. I don't think Ježek is. I mean, certainly in the Czech Republic, Ježek's very well known, and people play that music, and they do the kinds of things that these musicians did. And you know, again, it's only arrogance the way you'd make some blanket statement. And Ježek would have liked it. I mean, what do I know? But Ježek would have liked it. I mean, he would have loved the kind of updated version of his music with different kinds of harmonies that he would have used, and a kind of, you know, and again, I on the count, fingers of one hand, do you count the people who made a career in both worlds? In this country, the most famous example was the composer Mel Powell, who was very well known as a jazz musician and also wrote, you know, again, dissonant, difficult music, as did Ježek. And I just hope that Ježek becomes better known in this country, because I think his compositions are worthwhile. And as a figure, as an idea, as a biography, in tandem with the music, I think it's particularly compelling.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And of course, thanks to the performers. Maybe we could give one more hand to the performers.